Hi, folks. Um, it's April 3rd. Oh, hi, Jules. I don't know who else is out there. Um, so, I've been editing podcast all day. Uh, it's going to be out tomorrow. The newest episode of Muppet Sex and Trauma. Um, yeah, it was a bad episode of Farscape we talked about for 2.5 hours. So I'm kind of splitting the episode in two. Hi, Jessica. Um, so yeah, I've been listening to myself and my friends talk about terrible tropes all day. Ay, ay, ay. Fun, fun, fun. Uh, hopefully it's I think it's a engaging. Um, yeah, but it is sort of the embodiment of the meme. It's like, ooh, whole lot to unpack there. Speaking of a lot to unpack, Mr. Collins. So, yesterday we read the chapters where he proposed to Elizabeth, very, very sure he was going to get a positive reaction, which he did not. And yeah, so we will be reading the fallout now with chapter 21. The discussion of Mr. Collins' offer was now nearly at an end, and Elizabeth had only to suffer from the uncomfortable feelings necessarily attending it, and occasionally from some peevish illusion of her mother. As for the gentleman himself, his feelings were chiefly expressed not by embarrassment or dejection, or by trying to avoid her, but by stiffness of manner and resentful silence. He scarcely ever spoke to her, and the assiduous attentions which he had been so sensible of himself were transferred for the rest of the day to Miss Lucas, whose civility in listening to him was a seasonable relief to them all, and especially to her friend. The morrow produced no abatement of Mrs. Bennet's ill humour or ill health. Mr. Collins was also in the same state of angry pride. Elizabeth had hoped that his resentment might shorten his visit, but his plans did not appear in the least affected by it. He was always to have gone on Saturday, and to Saturday he still meant to stay. After breakfast, the girls walked to Meryton to inquire if Mr. Wickham were returned, and to lament over his absence from the Netherfield ball. He joined them on entering the town, and attended them to their aunt's, where his regret and vexation and the concern of everyone was talked over. To Elizabeth, however, he voluntarily acknowledged that the necessity of his absence had been self-imposed. "I found," said he, "as the time drew near, that I had better not meet Mr. Darcy. That to be in the same room, the same party with him, for so many hours together, might be more than I could bear, and that scenes might arise unpleasant to more than myself." She highly approved of his forbearance, and they had leisure for full discussion of it, and for all commendation which they civilly bestowed on each other, as Wickham and another officer walked back with them to Longbourn, and during the walk he particularly attended to her. His accompanying them was a double advantage. She felt all the compliment it offered herself, and it was far more acceptable as an occasion of introducing him to her father and mother. Soon after their return, a letter was delivered to Miss Bennet. It came from Netherfield, and was opened immediately. The envelope contained a sheet of elegant little hot-pressed paper, well covered with a lady's fair flowing hand, and Elizabeth saw her sister's countenance change as she read it, and saw her dwelling intently on some particular passages. Jane recollected herself soon, and putting the letter away, tried to join with her usual cheerfulness in the general conversation. But Elizabeth felt an anxiety on the subject which drew off her attention even from Wickham, and no sooner had he and his companions taken leave than a glance from Jane invited her to follow her upstairs. When they gained their own room, Jane, taking out the letter, said, "This is from Caroline Bingley. What it contains has surprised me a good deal. The whole party have left Netherfield by this time, and are on their way to town, and without any intention of coming back again. You shall hear what she says." She then read the first sentence aloud, which comprised the information of them having just resolved to follow their brother to town directly, and of their meaning to dine that day in Grosvenor Street, where Mr. Hurst had house. And the next were these words: "I do not pretend to regret anything I shall leave in Hertfordshire, except your society, my dearest friend. But we will hope at some future period to enjoy many returns of this delightful intercourse we have known in the meanwhile may lessen the pain of separation by a very frequent and most unreserved correspondence. I depend on you for that." To these high-flown expressions Elizabeth listened with all the insensibility of distrust. And though the suddenness of their removal surprised her, she saw nothing in it really to lament. It was not to be supposed that their absence from Netherfield would prevent Mr. Bingley being there, and as to the loss of their society, she was persuaded that Jane must soon cease to regard it in the enjoyment of his. It is unlucky," she said after a short pause, "that you should not be able to see your friends before they leave the country. But may we not hope that the period of future happiness to which Miss Bingley might look forward may arrive earlier than she is aware, and that the delightful intercourse you have known as friends will be renewed with yet greater satisfaction as sisters. Mr. Bingley will not be detained in London by them." "Caroline decided that none of the party will return until Hertfordshire this winter. I will read it to you. When my brother left us yesterday, I imagined that the business which took him to London might be concluded in 3 or 4 days. But as we are certain it cannot be so, and with the same time convinced that when Charles gets to town, he will be in no hurry to leave it again, we are determined on following him thither, that he may not be obliged to spend his vacant hours in a comfortless hotel. Many of my acquaintance are already there for the winter. I wish I could hear that you, my dearest friend, had any intention of making one of the crowd, but of that I despair. I sincerely hope your Christmas in Hertfordshire may abound in the gaieties which that season generally brings, and that your beaux will be numerous as to prevent your feeling the loss of the 3 of whom we will deprive you." "It is evident by this," added Jane, "that he comes back no more this winter." "It is also evident that Miss Bingley does not mean he should." "It is only evident that Miss Bingley does not mean he should." "Why, will you think so? It must be his own doing. He is his own master. But you do not know all. I will read you the passage which particularly hurts me. I will have no reserves from you. Mr. Darcy is scarcely less eager to meet her again, is impatient to see his sister, and to confess the truth, we are scarcely less eager to meet her again. I really do not think Georgiana Darcy has an equal for beauty, elegance, and accomplishments, and the affection she inspires in Louisa and myself is heightened into something still more interesting from the hopes we dare to entertain of her being hereafter our sister. I do not know whether I ever before mentioned to you my feelings on the subject, but I will not leave the country without confiding them, and I trust you will not esteem them unreasonable. My brother admires her greatly already, and will have frequent opportunity now of seeing her on a most intimate footing. Her relations all wish the connection as much as his own, and a sister's partiality is not misleading me. I think, when I call Charles most capable of engaging any woman's heart. With all these circumstances in favor any attachment, and nothing to prevent it, am I wrong, my dearest Jane, in indulging the hope of an event which will secure the happiness of so many? What think you of this sentence, my dear Lizzie? Said Jane as she finished it. Is it not clear enough? Does it not expressly declare that Caroline neither expects nor wishes me to be her sister, that she is perfectly convinced of her brother's indifference, and that if she suspects the nature of my feelings for him, she means, most kindly, to put me on my guard? Can there be any other opinion on the subject? Oh, yes, there can, for mine is totally different. Will you hear it? Most willingly. You shall have it in a few words. Miss Bingley sees that your brother is in love with you, and wants him to marry Miss Bingley. She follows him to town in the hopes of keeping him there, and tries to persuade you that he does not care about you. Jane shook her head. Indeed, Jane, you ought to believe me. No one who has ever seen you two together can doubt his affection. Miss Bingley, I am sure, cannot. She is not such a simpleton. Could she have seen half as much love in Mr. Darcy for herself, she would have ordered her wedding clothes. But the case is this. We are not rich enough, or grand enough for them, and she is most anxious to get Miss Darcy for her brother. From the notion that when there have been one intermarriage, she may have less trouble in achieving a second, in which she is then there thoroughly certain some ingenuity, and I dare say it would succeed if Mr. Berg was out of the way. But, my dearest Jane, you cannot seriously imagine that because Miss Bingley tells you her brother greatly admires Miss Darcy, that he is in the smallest degree less sensible of your merit than when he took leave of you Tuesday, or that he will be in her power to persuade him of instead of being in love with you, that he is very much in love with her friend. If we thought alike of Miss Bingley, replied Jane, your representation of all this might make me quite easy, but I know the foundation is unjust. Caroline is incapable of wilfully deceiving anyone, and all that I can hope in this case is that she has deceived herself. That is right. You could not have started a more happy idea. Since you will not take comfort in mine, believe her to be deceived by all means. You have done your duty by her, and must fret no longer. But my dear sister, can I be happy, even supposing the best, and accepting a man whose sisters and friends are all wishing him to marry elsewhere? You must decide for yourself, said Elizabeth, and upon mature deliberation you find that the misery of disobliging his two sisters is more than equivalent to the happiness of being his wife. I advise you by all means to refuse him. How can you talk so? Said Jane, smiling. You must know that I should be exceedingly grieved at their disapprobation. I could not hesitate. I did not think. Okay. How can you talk so? Said Jane, faintly smiling. You must know that though I should be exceedingly grieved by their disapprobation, I could not hesitate. I did not think you would. And that being the case, I cannot consider your situation with much compassion. But if he returns no more this winter, my choice will never be required. 1,000 things may arise in 6 months. The idea of his returning no more Elizabeth treated with the utmost contempt. It appeared to her merely the suggestion of Caroline's interested wishes, and she could not for a moment support that those wishes, however openly or artfully spoken, could influence a young man so totally independent of everyone. She represented to her sister as forcefully as possible that she felt on the subject, and had soon the pleasure of seeing its happy effect. Jane's temper was not desponding, and she was gradually led to hope that the difference of affection sometimes overcame the hope that Bingley would return to Netherfield and answer every wish of her heart. They agreed that Mrs. Bennet should only hear of the departure of the family without alarming on the score of the gentleman's conduct, but even this partial communication gave her a great deal of concern, and she bewailed it as an exceedingly unlucky that the ladies should happen to go away just as they were all getting so intimate together. After lamenting it, however, at some length, she had the consolation of thinking that Mr. Bingley would soon go down again and be soon dining at Longbourn, and the conclusion of all was the comfortable declaration that, though he had been invited only to a family dinner, she would take care to have 2 full courses. Um, yeah, Miss Darcy is on the edge of 15 to 16. I think they say that she's at the beginning of when they first introduced her, they say she's not 16, so she's just about to turn 16. So yeah, she's very young. But they did marry younger in those days, but the idea of a 15-year-old marrying is shocking. The 16-year-old is a little iffy. But yeah. Chapter 22. The Bennets were engaged to dine with the Lucases, and again during the chief of the day was Miss Lucas so kind as to listen to Mr. Collins. Elizabeth took an opportunity of thanking her. "It keeps him in good humour," said she, "and I'm more obliged to you than I can express." Charlotte assured her friend of her satisfaction in being useful, and that it amply repaid her for the little sacrifice of her time. This was very amiable, but Charlotte's kindness extended further than Elizabeth had any conception of. Its object was nothing less than to secure for her from any return of Mr. Collins' addresses by engaging them towards herself. Such was Miss Lucas's scheme, and appearances were so favourable that when they parted at night, she would have felt almost sure of her success had he not been to leave Hertfordshire so very soon. But here she did injustice to the fire and independence of his character, for it led him to escape out of Longbourn House the next morning with admirable slyness and hasten to Lucas Lodge to throw himself at her feet. He was anxious to avoid the notice of his cousins, from the conviction that if they saw him depart, they could not fail to conjecture his desire, and he was not willing to have the attempt known till its success could be known likewise. For though feeling almost secure, and with reason, for Charlotte had been tolerably encouraging, he was comparatively diffident since the adventure of Wednesday. His reception, however, was of the most flattering kind. Miss Lucas perceived him from an upper window as he walked towards the house, and instantly set out to meet him accidentally in the lane. But little had she dared to hope that so much love and eloquence awaited her there. In as short a time as Mr. Collins' long speech would allow, everything was settled between them to the satisfaction of both, and they entered the house. As they entered the house, he earnestly entreated her to name the day that was to make him the happiest of men, and though such a solicitation must be waived for the present, the lady felt no inclination to trifle with his happiness. The stupidity with which he was favoured by nature must guard his courtship from any charm that could make a woman wish for its continuance, and Miss Lucas, who had accepted him solely from a pure and disinterested desire of an establishment, cared not how soon that establishment might be gained. Sir William and Lady Lucas were speedily applied for their consent, and it was bestowed with most joyful alacrity. Mr. Collins' present circumstance made it a most eligible match for their daughter, to whom they could give little fortune, and his prospects for future wealth were exceedingly fair. Lady Lucas began directly to calculate, with more interest than the matter had ever excited before, how many years longer Mr. Bennet was likely to live. And Sir William gave it as his decided opinion that whenever Mr. Collins should be in possession of the Longbourn estate, it would be highly expedient that both he and his wife should make their appearances at St. James. The whole family, in short, was properly overjoyed on the occasion. The younger girls formed hopes of coming out a year or two sooner than they might otherwise have done, and the boys were relieved from their apprehension of Charlotte dying an old maid. Charlotte herself was tolerably composed. She had gained her point, and had time to consider of it. Her reflections were in general satisfactory. Mr. Collins was neither sensible nor agreeable. His society was irksome, and his attachment to her must be imaginary. But still he would be her husband. Without thinking highly either of men or matrimony, marriage had always been her object. It was the only honourable provision for a well-educated young woman of small fortune, and however uncertain of giving happiness, must be their pleasantest preservation from want. This preservation she now obtained, and at the age of 27, gasp, without having ever been handsome, she felt all the good luck of it. The least agreeable circumstance in the business was the surprise it must occasion to Elizabeth Bennet, whose friendship she valued beyond that of any other person. Elizabeth would wonder, and probably would blame her, though her resolution was not to be shaken. Her feelings must be hurt by such disapprobation. She resolved to give her the information herself, and therefore charged Mr. Collins, when returning to Longbourn to dinner, to drop no hint of what had passed before any of the family. A promise of secrecy was of course very dutifully given, but it could not be kept without difficulty, for the curiosity excited by his long absence burst forth in such very direct questions on his return as required some ingenuity to evade, and he was at the same time exercising great self-denial, for he was longing to publish his prosperous love. As he was beginning his journey too early on the morrow to see any of the family, the ceremony of leave-taking was performed when the ladies moved for the night, and Mrs. Bennet was, with great politeness and cordiality, said how happy that they should be to see him at Longbourn again, when his other engagements might allow him to make a visit there. "My dear madam," replied he, "this invitation is particularly gratifying, because it is what I have been hoping to receive, and you may be certain that I shall avail myself on it as soon as possible." They were all astonished, and Mr. Bennet could by no means wish so speedy a return, immediately said, "But there's not danger of Lady Catherine's disapprobation here, my good sir. You had better neglect your relations than run the risk of offending your patroness." "My dear sir," replied Mr. Collins, "I am particularly obliged to you for your friendly caution, and you may depend upon my not taking so material a step without her ladyship's concurrence." "You cannot be too much on your guard. Risk anything rather than her displeasure, and if you find it likely to be raised by your coming to visit us again, which I should think exceedingly probable, stay quietly at home and be satisfied that we take no offence." "Believe me, my dear sir, my gratitude is warmly excited by such an affectionate answer. And depend upon it, you will speedily receive from me a letter of thanks for this, as well as for every other mark of regard during my stay in Hertfordshire. As for my fair cousins, though my absence may not be long enough to render it necessary, I shall now take my liberty of wishing them health and happiness, not excepting my cousin Elizabeth." With proper civilities, the ladies withdrew, all of them equally surprised to find that he meditated a quick return. Mrs. Bennet wished to understand by it that he thought of paying his address to one of her younger girls, and Mary might have been prevailed on to accept him. She rated his abilities much higher than any of the others. There was a solidity in his reflections which often struck her, and though by no means so clever as herself, she thought that if encouraged to read and improve himself by such an example as hers, he might come to become a very agreeable companion. But on the following morning every hope of this kind was done away. Miss Lucas called soon after breakfast, and in a private conference with Elizabeth related the events of the day before. The possibility of Mr. Collins fancying himself in love with her friend had once occurred to Elizabeth within the last day or two, but that Charlotte could encourage him seemed almost as far from possibility as that she could encourage him herself, and her astonishment was consequentially so great as to overcome at first bounds of decorum, and she could not help crying out, "Engaged to Mr. Collins! My dear Charlotte! Impossible! You're gay!" Sorry. The steady countenance which Miss Lucas had commanded in telling her story gave way to a momentary confusion on her receiving so direct a reproach, though, as if it was no more than she expected, she soon regained her composure and calmly replied, "Why are you so surprised, my dear Eliza? Do you think it incredible that Mr. Collins should procure any woman's good opinion because he was not so happy to succeed with you?" But Elizabeth had recollected herself, and making a strong effort for it, was able to assure her with tolerable firmness that the prospect of their relationship was highly grateful to her, and that she wished her friend all imaginable unimaginable happiness. I see what you are feeling, replied Charlotte. You must be surprised, very much surprised, so lately as Mr. Collins was wishing to marry you. But when you have had time to think it all over, I hope you will be satisfied as to what I have done. I am not romantic, as you know. I never was. I ask only for a comfortable home, and considering Mr. Collins' character, connections, and situations in life, I am convinced that my chance of happiness with him is as fair as most people can boast on entering a marriage state. Elizabeth quietly answered, Undoubtedly, and after an awkward pause they returned to the rest of the family. Charlotte did not stay much longer, and Elizabeth was then left to reflect on what she had heard. It was a long time before she became at all reconciled to the idea of so unsuitable a match. The strangeness of Mr. Collins making 2 offers of marriage within 3 days was nothing in comparison of his now being accepted. She had always felt that Charlotte's opinion of matrimony was not exactly like her own, but she could not have supposed it possible that when called into action she would have sacrificed every better feeling to worldly advantage. Charlotte, the wife of Mr. Collins? It was the most humiliating picture, and to the pang of a friend disgracing herself and sunk in her esteem was added the distressing conviction that it was impossible for that friend to be tolerably happy in the lot that she had chosen. Yeah, Charlotte Lucas is one of the most widely read queer assumed characters. But we could also read her as aromantic, Anyway, chapter 23. Elizabeth was sitting with her mother and sisters, reflecting on what she had heard, and doubting whether she was authorized to mention it, when Sir William Lucas himself appeared, sent by his daughter to announce her engagement to the family. With many compliments to them, and much self-congratulation on the prospect of a connection between the houses, he unfolded the matter to an audience not merely wondering, but incredulous, for Mrs. Bennet, with more perseverance than politeness, protested he must be entirely mistaken, and Lydia, always unguarded and often uncivil, boisterously exclaimed, "Good Lord, Sir William Lucas! How can you tell such a story? Do you not know that Mr. Collins wants to marry Lydia?" Nothing less than the complacence of a courtier could have borne without anger at such treatment, but Sir William's good breeding carried him through it all, and though he begged leave to be positive as to the truth of his information, he listened to all their impertinence with the most forbearing courtesy. Elizabeth, feeling it incumbent on her to relieve him from so unpleasant a situation, now put herself forward to confirm his account, by mentioning her prior knowledge of it from Charlotte herself, and endeavouring to put a stop to the exclamations of her mother and sisters by the earnestness of her congratulations to Sir William, in which she was readily joined by Jane, and by making a variety of remarks on the happiness that might be expected from the match, the excellent character of Mr. Collins, and the convenient distance of Hunsford from London. Mrs. Bennet was in fact too much overpowered to say a great deal while Sir Williams remained, but no sooner had she left him than her feelings found rapid vent. In the first place, she persisted in disbelieving the whole of the matter. Secondly, she was very sure that Mr. Collins had been taken in. Thirdly, she trusted that they would never be happy together. And fourthly, that the match might be broken off. 2 inferences, however, were plainly deduced from the whole one: that Elizabeth was the real cause of all the mischief, and the other that she herself had been barbarously used by them all. And on these 2 points she was principally dwelt during the rest of the day. Nothing could console and nothing appease her, nor did that day wear out her resentment. A week elapsed before she could see Elizabeth without scolding her. A month passed before she could speak to Sir William or Lady Lucas without being rude, and many months were gone before she could at all forgive their daughter. Mr. Bennet's emotions were much more tranquil on the occasion, and such as he did experience he pronounced to be of a most agreeable sort. For it gratified him, he said, to discover that Charlotte Lucas, whom he had been used to think tolerably sensible, was as foolish as his wife, and more foolish than his daughter. Jane confessed herself a little surprised at the match, but she said less of her astonishment than of her earnest desire for their happiness. Nor could Elizabeth persuade her to consider it as improbable. Kitty and Lydia were far from envying Miss Lucas, for Mr. Collins was only a clergyman, and it affected them in no other way than as a piece of news to spread at Meryton. Lady Lucas could not be insensible of triumph on her being able to report on Mrs. Bennet the comfort of having a daughter well married, and she called at Longbourn rather oftener than usual to say how happy she was, though Mrs. Bennet's sour looks and ill-natured remarks might have been enough to drive happiness away. Between Elizabeth and Charlotte there was a restraint which had kept them mutually silent on the subject, and Elizabeth felt persuaded that no real confidence could ever subsist between them again. Her disappointment in Charlotte made her turn with fond regard to her sister, whose rectitude and delicacy she was sure of her opinion could never be shaken, and for whose happiness she grew daily more anxious, as Bingley had now gone a week, and nothing was heard of his return. Jane had sent Caroline an early answer to her letter, and was counting the days till she might reasonably hope to hear again. The promised letter of thanks from Mr. Collins arrived on Tuesday, addressed to their father, and written with all the solemnity and gratitude which a 12 months' abode in the family might have prompted. After discharging his conscience on that head, he proceeded to inform them with most rapturous expressions of his happiness in having obtained the affection of their admirable neighbour Miss Lucas, and then explained that it was merely from the view of enjoying her society that he had been so readily to close with the kind wish of seeing him again at Longbourn. Whether he hoped to be able to return on Monday fortnight, for Lady Catherine he added, was so heartily approved of his marriage that she wished it could take place as soon as possible, which she entrusted would be an unanswerable argument with his amiable Charlotte to name an early day for making him the happiest of men. Mr. Collins' return into Hertfordshire was no longer a matter of pleasure to Miss Bennet. On the contrary, she was as much disposed to complain of it as her husband, and it was very strange that he should come to Longbourn instead of Lucas Lodge. It would be also very inconvenient and exceedingly troublesome. She hated having visitors in the house while her health was so indifferent, and lovers were of all people the most disagreeable. Such were the gentle murmurs of Mrs. Bennet, and they gave way only to the greater distress of Mr. Bingley's continued absence. Neither Jane nor Elizabeth were comfortable on this subject. Day after day passed without bringing any other tidings of him than the report which shortly prevailed in Meryton of his coming no more to Netherfield the whole winter. A report which highly incensed Mrs. Bennet, and which she never failed to contradict as a most scandalous rumour. Even Elizabeth began to fear, not that Bingley himself was indifferent, but that his sisters would be successful in keeping him away. Unwilling as she was to admit any idea so destructive to Jane's happiness, and so dishonourable to her stability of her lover, she could not prevent its frequent recurrence. The united efforts of his too unfeeling sister and his overpowering friend, assisted by the attractions of Miss Darcy and the amusements of London, might be too much, she feared, for the strength of his attachment. As for Jane, her anxiety under the suspense was, of course, more painful than Jane's. But whatever she felt she was desirous of concealing, and between herself and Elizabeth, therefore, the subject was never alluded to. But as no such delicacy restrained her mother, an hour seldom passed in which she did not talk of Bingley, expressing her impatience for his arrival, or even requiring Jane to confess that if he did not come back, she should think herself very ill-used. It needed all Jane's steady mildness to bear these attacks with tolerable tranquillity. Mr. Collins returned most punctually on the Monday fortnight, but his reception at Longbourn was not quite so gracious as it had been on his first introduction. He was too happy, however, to need much attention, and luckily for the others, the business of love-making relieved them from a great deal of his company. The chief of every day was spent by him at Lucas Lodge, and he sometimes returned to Longbourn only in time to make an apology for his absence before the family went to bed. Mrs. Bennet was really in a most pitiable state. The very mention of anything concerning the match threw her into an agony of ill humour, and wherever she went she was sure of hearing it talked of. The sight of Miss Lucas was odious to her. As her successor in the house, she regarded her with jealous abhorrence. Whenever Charlotte came to see them, she concluded her to be anticipating the hour of possession, and whenever she spoke in a low voice to Mr. Collins was convinced that they were talking of the Longbourn estate, and resolving to turn herself and her daughters out of the house as soon as Mr. Bennet was dead. She complained of it bitterly to her husband. "Indeed, Mr. Bennet," said she, it is very hard to think that Charlotte Lucas should ever be the mistress of this house, and that I should be forced to make way for her, and live to see her take my place in it." "My dear, do not give way to such gloomy thoughts. Let us hope for better things. Let us flatter ourselves that I may be the survivor." This was not very consoling to Mrs. Bennet, and therefore, instead of making an answer, she went on as before. "I cannot bear to think that they should have this estate. If it were not for the entail, I should not mind it." Excuse me. "I should not mind anything at all." "Let us be thankful that you are preserved from the state of such insensibility." I never can be thankful, Mr. Bennet, for anything about the entail. How anyone could have the conscience to entail away an estate from one's own daughter, I cannot understand, and for all the sake of Mr. Collins too, why should he have it more than anybody else? I leave it to yourself to determine. So that's it for today. I don't know about Charlotte and Elizabeth as a fan fiction match. Because Elizabeth is well matched elsewhere. Oh, thank you. Sorry, just sneezing. Oh, I got it away from the mic. I want Charlotte to meet a nice girl. Maybe a nice widow. Hopefully, she becomes one herself. Is in her new neighborhood, someone near Rosings, nice widow, or a spinster with a independent income. I can grow lavender and have a dog named Sappho. See if you get that reference. Yes. So yeah, we'll that's where we'll leave things for today, and we'll imagine Charlotte a very nice widow or independent means spinster. So yeah. Yeah. She could also be Arrow Ace and just enjoy herself as a widow. And find nice friends. Okay, so we will see you tomorrow for the next 3 chapters. We're getting through this book actually quite well. It's yeah. So yeah. Okay, so yeah, I will see you all tomorrow for the next lot. Okay.